My brother secretly took out a mortgage on my parents' house. He said, "They'll never know." I found out, and had him reported for fraud. It all started with a call I didn't expect. I was in my kitchen, halfway through my second cup of coffee, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was bad luck. "Is this Mr. Fenton Calloway?" The voice on the other end was professional but had an edge that made me immediately uneasy. "Yes," I said, already on guard. "Who's asking?" "This is Leslie from First National Bank. I'm calling about the overdue payments on the mortgage for 142 Briarwood Lane." I nearly dropped the phone. "I think you've got the wrong number," I said. "That's my parents' house. They don't have a mortgage." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, Mr. Calloway, but our records indicate a mortgage was taken out on that property 9 months ago. The account is now 2 months past due." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. 142 Briarwood Lane was my parents' pride and joy. They'd lived there for over 40 years, paying it off penny by penny until it was truly theirs. There was no way they'd take out a loan against it, not at their age, not with how careful they were about money. Something was seriously wrong. I didn't waste time. I drove straight to their house that afternoon, my mind racing the entire way. My parents are in their 70s, retired, and living a quiet life. My dad, Ray, is a man of few words, but he's always been solid and dependable. My mom, Eloise, is the type who still clips coupons even though they don't need to. They've never had debts they couldn't pay off. This wasn't just out of character, it was impossible. When I pulled into their driveway, my mom was out front, tending to her rose bushes like nothing was wrong. My dad was sitting on the porch with a glass of iced tea, his usual scowl in place as he stared at the neighbor's overgrown lawn. Everything looked so normal, and for a second, I wondered if the bank had made a mistake. But I knew better. "Hey, Fen." My mom called, waving. "Come in for lunch. I've got leftover chicken salad." "Not hungry," I said, barely stopping to say hello. "I need to talk to you both." "Inside." They followed me into the kitchen, looking confused. My mom was already wringing her hands, a nervous habit she's had forever. My dad just frowned, clearly annoyed at the interruption. I didn't sugarcoat it. "I got a call from a bank today. They said there's a mortgage on the house, and payments are overdue." "What's going on?" My mom's face went blank. My dad's brow furrowed so deeply I thought his forehead might split. "What mortgage?" he barked. "We don't have a mortgage." "That's what I told them," I said. "But they insisted. $180,000. Taken out 9 months ago." My mom looked at my dad, her eyes wide. "Ray, we didn't." "Of course we didn't," he snapped. "This is ridiculous. We paid this house off years ago." I didn't know what to say. "They had paperwork," I said. "Signatures. Loan documents. It's all in their records." My dad stood up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. "Let me see those papers." "I don't have them. But they're real. Something's going on." For the next hour, we tore through their files, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. Every drawer, every file, every folder. Nothing. My parents didn't even recognize the bank's name. But there was no denying it now, someone had taken out a mortgage on their house, and it wasn't them. Finally, my mom sat down heavily, her face pale. Do you think Lionel had something to do with this?" I felt a wave of anger and dread crash over me. Lionel. My younger brother. The black sheep. He'd been in and out of trouble for as long as I could remember. Gambling. Bad business deals. Borrowing money he never paid back. And now this? "When was the last time you saw him?" I asked. My mom hesitated. "He was staying in the basement for a while last year," she said quietly. "But he left. Said he found a place of his own." My dad clenched his jaw. "He never finds his own place. He always comes back with his tail between his legs." "I'm going to check the basement," I said. It was cold and damp down there, like basements always are. The old couch Lionel used to crash on was still there, along with the usual clutter, tools, storage boxes, Christmas decorations. But tucked under a pile of junk mail, I found what I was looking for, an envelope addressed to Lionel from First National Bank. I didn't need to open it. I already knew what it was. My brother had done this. Finding Lionel wasn't hard. He wasn't exactly discreet about where he hung out. I found him at some hole-in-the-wall bar downtown, sitting at the counter with a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. He looked rough, unshaven, bags under his eyes, shirt wrinkled like he'd been sleeping in it. When he saw me, he smiled like nothing was wrong. "Fenton," he said, spreading his arms like he expected me to hug him. "What's up, man?" I didn't sit down. "You know exactly what's up," I said, my voice low. "The mortgage. The one you took out on Mom and Dad's house. What the hell were you thinking?" His smile dropped,
And for a split second, I saw a flicker of guilt.
Then he shrugged. Look, it's not a big deal. I needed some cash, okay? I was gonna pay it back. Not a big deal? I hissed. You forged their signatures. You put their house on the line. How could you do this to them? He rolled his eyes like I was the unreasonable one. The house is worth plenty. They'll never lose it. It's just a loan. Chill out. Chill out? I was so angry I could barely get the words out. They trusted you, and you stole from them. Do you even understand what you've done? I said I'll pay it back, he snapped. I've got something in the works. A deal. Big money. It's all under control. I stared at him, barely believing what I was hearing. Lionel had always been a screw-up, but this was beyond anything I thought he was capable of. He'd crossed a line, and there was no coming back. It's not under control, I said. The payments are overdue. Mom and Dad could lose everything because of you. He leaned back in his chair, looking bored. They're not gonna lose the house. The bank doesn't want the house. They want money. And I'll get it to them. Just relax. I didn't say anything else. I just turned and walked out, my stomach churning. For the first time in my life, I realized Lionel wasn't just irresponsible, he was dangerous. And I couldn't let him get away with it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake thinking about everything Lionel had done, everything my parents had sacrificed to give him chance after chance, and how he'd repaid them by putting their home, our childhood home, at risk. I couldn't let this go. I had to make it right. The next morning, I sat down with my parents and told them everything. I told them I'd found proof that Lionel was behind the mortgage and that he admitted to it. My mom cried quietly while my dad sat there in silence, his hands trembling. Finally, he looked at me and said, "What do we do?" I'd already thought it through. "We go to the police." My mom gasped. "Fenton, he's your brother. And he stole from you," I said firmly. "If we don't stop him now, he'll just keep doing it. Who knows what he'll try next? He's not going to stop until someone makes him." It was the hardest decision my parents ever had to make, but in the end, they agreed. My dad went with me to the police station that afternoon. We brought all the documents, bank statements, the envelope from the basement, and even some old letters where Lionel had practiced their signatures. The detective listened patiently as we laid everything out. "This is fraud," he said finally, his tone serious. "And given the amount of money involved, it's a felony. Are you sure you want to press charges?" I looked at my dad. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes were hard. "We're sure," he said. A week later, Lionel was arrested. I didn't tell my parents when it was going to happen, I didn't want them to have to see it. But I made sure I was there. Watching him being handcuffed outside that same bar where I'd confronted him felt surreal. He spotted me standing by my car and shouted, "Fenton. What the hell is this? You did this to me?" I didn't answer. I just watched as they put him in the back of the squad car and drove off. The fallout was messy. Lionel called from jail, begging my parents to drop the charges. My mom cried every time the phone rang, but my dad refused to even pick it up. He made his choice, he said. Now he can deal with the consequences. The investigation uncovered more than we expected. Lionel hadn't just taken out a mortgage on my parents' house, he'd also maxed out credit cards in their names and tried to open a line of credit using my dad's social security number. The prosecutor had more than enough evidence to make a solid case. Lionel eventually took a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence, but he still ended up with 3 years in prison and a hefty restitution order. The day he was sentenced, my mom was too emotional to go to court, but my dad and I sat in the back row as the judge read out the terms. Lionel didn't look at us once. When it was over, my dad stood up, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "You're not my son anymore." I don't think I've ever seen Lionel look so small. Over the next year, things slowly went back to normal. My parents and I worked with the bank to restructure the debt, and I helped cover the payments until we could get it under control. It wasn't easy, but we managed. The house was safe. As for Lionel, he tried writing letters from prison, long, rambling apologies full of excuses and promises to change. My mom read every one, but my dad burned them without a second glance. If he wanted to change, he said, he should have done it before he ruined our lives. A year after Lionel got out, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he was living in a halfway house and working a minimum wage job. I didn't feel bad for him. He'd had every opportunity to turn his life around, and he threw them all away. I haven't spoken to him since, and neither have my parents. The house on Briarwood Lane is still standing, still ours. Every time I visit, I feel a surge of pride knowing we didn't let Lionel destroy it. My parents are finally at peace, and I've moved on with my life. Lionel got what he deserved, and my parents got the justice they needed. That's all I ever wanted.